Modern institutions are under pressure. Modern institutions are under pressure to act faster than they can justify. A crisis appears, a headline circulates, a market signal moves, an AI system produces an output, a public demand intensifies, a state detects a threat, a government agency faces pressure to respond. And very quickly, the system asks, what should we do? But PII asks a prior question. Has action become admissible? This is the central problem addressed in the PII monograph. Toward a theory of admissible governance, signal, knowledge, ontology, constraint, legitimacy, and action. The core claim is simple. Governance fails when action outruns admissibility. Action is not justified merely because it is urgent. It is not justified merely because it is legal. It is not justified merely because it is efficient. It is not justified merely because it is technically possible. It is not justified merely because it is popular. And it is not justified merely because it can be explained afterwards. For action to become admissible, it must pass through a sequence. That sequence is signal, knowledge, ontology, constraint, legitimacy, admissibility, action. A signal is not yet knowledge. A signal may be a complaint, a warning, a protest, a model output, a market price, a diplomatic statement, a media story, or a risk indicator. But signals can be distorted. They can be amplified. They can be ignored. They can be manipulated. They can be misread. So the first task of governance is not to act. It is to preserve and interpret the signal. The second stage is knowledge. What do we actually know? What is evidence? What is testimony? What is inference? What is uncertainty? What is merely belief? What has been assumed? What has been excluded? A system that acts on weak knowledge may still appear decisive. But decisiveness without knowledge is not governance, it is reaction. The third stage is ontology. In PII terms, ontology means practical classification before action. What kind of issue is this? Is it a legal issue, a rights issue, a public value issue, a security issue, a technological issue, a legitimacy issue, a communication issue, a structural issue, a fiscal issue, or a compound issue that crosses several domains? Misclassification is one of the deepest sources of governance failure. A trust problem may be treated as a public relations problem. A rights problem may be treated as a cost problem. An AI governance problem may be treated as a technical performance problem. A social crisis may be treated as a messaging problem. A structural failure may be treated as an individual scandal. When the issue is classified wrongly, the action that follows may be efficient, legal, and confident, but still inadmissible. The fourth stage is constraint. Once the issue has been classified, the system must ask, what now limits action? What rights apply? What duties apply? What ethical boundaries apply? What institutional responsibilities apply? What public law constraints apply? What organizational mechanisms must operate? What harms must be prevented? What must not be done? Constraint is not obstruction. Constraint is what prevents power from becoming arbitrary. Without constraint, governance becomes administration plus force, or communication plus power, or technology plus automation, or strategy without legitimacy. The fifth stage is legitimacy. Can the action be justified to those affected? Can it be justified in public reason? Can it withstand scrutiny? Can it be explained without concealment? Can it be corrected if wrong? Can the institution show that consultation, evidence, rights, and public value actually mattered? Legitimacy is not the same as approval. It is not the same as popularity, and it is not the same as communication. A policy is not legitimate merely because it has a narrative. A decision is not legitimate merely because it has a press release. An AI system is not legitimate merely because it has an ethics statement. A public agency is not legitimate merely because it followed a procedure. Legitimacy requires the visible connection between signal, knowledge, classification, constraint, and action. Only then do we reach admissibility. Admissibility is the threshold. It is the gate. It is the moment where the system can say, the signal has been preserved, knowledge has been tested, the issue has been classified, constraints have been identified, legitimacy has been examined. Correction remains possible. Action may now proceed. This is why the visual metaphor of the admissibility gate matters. The gate is not a wall against action. It is the disciplined threshold that prevents premature action. It holds action back until justification has matured. That is governance. Not speed alone, not power alone, not communication alone, not data alone, not law alone, not strategy alone. Governance is the disciplined production of admissible collective action.
This matters across every serious domain. In public administration, it asks whether state authority has become justified action. In law, it asks whether legal categories match lived and institutional reality. In organizations, it asks whether values, incentives, and mechanisms actually constrain conduct. In media, it asks whether narratives preserve signal causality and responsibility. In AI, it asks whether computational output remains subordinate to human, legal, ethical, and institutional judgment. In money and public value, it asks whether cost has priced action or wrongly classified value. In globalization, it asks whether institutions can act when problems, consequences, and authority operate at different scales. In statecraft, it asks whether power has been sequenced through intelligence, law, proportionality, legitimacy, and restraint. The PII monograph develops this architecture in detail. But the central insight can be stated simply. Modern institutions do not only need better decisions, they need better conditions for deciding. They need signal discipline, knowledge discipline, classification discipline, constraint discipline, legitimacy discipline, and admissibility discipline. Because the danger of our time is not only that institutions fail to act, it is that they act before action has become justified. PI studies the conditions under which signals become knowledge. Knowledge becomes classification. Classification becomes constraint. Constraint becomes legitimacy, and legitimacy becomes admissible action. PI a discipline, not a trend. A framework, not an opinion. Frameworks turn complexity into admissible decisions.